Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me over halfway through the show's third season as the second producer bows out. Season 3 always used to be a wobble, whereas last time it was a pleasant surprise. This time I find myself enjoying Season 3 even more. I've always been quite partial to the arc as well, to be honest. It's just that, look, it isn't that I didn't enjoy it, it's that I didn't enjoy it as much this time. And while I have found plenty of things to love, which we'll get to in a bit, this has kind of levelled out as a bang average one. As I mentioned when discussing the massacre, I think John Wiles brought a definite sense of experimentation to his short time on the show, a time which comes to an end with this story. That might have been out of a genuine desire to make his mark, or simply out of reckless abandon. Either way, that tendency to play with the show's format and its viewers' expectations continues here. The "you're watching a two-parter, oh no you're not" bluff is probably what the arc will be most remembered for, and understandably so. It's a brilliant ruse. While not common, we've had the occasional two-part story before, so when they get back into the ship and shoot off again, it's not unreasonable to assume that the story's over and we're on to the next one. The switcheroo with the finished statue to show that the monoids have taken over before we've even met any characters in that portion of the story is some really good tenterhooking. It also has the nice undercurrent of the Doctor, Stephen and Dodo becoming legends within a matter of seconds from their and our perspectives. Passed through generations on the ship, but barely any time passing for them. And Doctor Who does this sometimes, the Doctor being a known entity to certain races and on certain planets. In Planet of the Daleks, the Thals tell the Doctor that the story of himself, Susan, Ian and Barbara having visited centuries and centuries and centuries before has passed into legend, and the Doctor explains that he's the same man. Here though, we get the before and after, right after one another, and that has a fun suggestion about the implications of time travel, which again highlights quite what the Doctor and his companions are capable of in this very unique show. Beyond this trick halfway through though, I realise these days nothing much else excites me about this story. It is a nice trick, but it's a trick nonetheless, and it can't be relied upon to carry a whole serial. There's the attempt at jeopardy when the presence of a bomb is revealed, but to be honest, even that doesn't really seem to be taken all that seriously. Even Venusa seems quite chipper when they're supposedly racing against time to find it. It all feels strangely undramatic. The supporting cast on the whole, except for Venusa, seem quite underwhelming, particularly, I'm sorry to say, Eric Elliott as the commander. His subjects don't inspire much more, and I find myself sympathising with the regulars, as it is left up to them to carry the whole thing. And one of them is a new arrival. They rise to the challenge admirably, but really only succeed in not embarrassing themselves rather than saving the whole enterprise. It's every man for himself, and like good crewmates, they save themselves and each other. But it seems that everybody else is kind of just left to go down with the ship. Following on from his superb work in the massacre, Peter Purvis becomes rather sidelined in the latter two episodes, but before then he's his usual reliable self. There's a great bit where he begins to worry that they might have carried infections with them everywhere they've been before. And it's sold wonderfully, so much so that it causes the audience to wonder the same thing, given the terrible weight it has here. Watched out of order or context, it seems that Stephen is simply concerned. But watched directly after the Daleks' master plan and the massacre, it has another overtone as well. Given Stephen's recent tribulations and his feelings about them, this is another reason for Stephen to think that the Doctor is quite reckless in his travels. Purvis is also excellent when Stephen is called upon to defend himself, the Doctor and Dodo as he succumbs to the fever as well. I found my mind drifting to the idea of Stephen as a replacement for Ian and couldn't help but imagine Ian in his place. Maybe I was imagining wrong, but it wouldn't have been as good. I'd always held Ian in high esteem, usually higher than Stephen, but I think this marathon is waking me up to a possibility that I'd been in the past too belligerent to accept, and that is that Ian is not unimpeachable, and that also Stephen is better. Purvis is phenomenally good, and I took a moment to consider that while he's been with us now for 5 full stories, one of those double length, most of his episodes up to this point don't actually exist. So to have made the impression that he's made, when taking that into account, is some good going. Basically, I always forget, outside of the massacre, how good Peter Purvis is. Imagining Ian pointedly saying that mankind hasn't moved on in 10 million years, I'm actually rather glad that it's Stephen who spits it out. I'd always sworn allegiance to Ian, but it's actually Stephen who's impressing more this time. And there is another companion in this story who is perhaps worth talking about more. After suddenly appearing at the end of the massacre, this is our first opportunity to get to know Dodo, one of Doctor Who's more unfortunate companions. Sure, Katerina and Sarah both died in the Doctor's care, but they don't seem to get anywhere near as much stick as Dodo does, the more the legacy has worn on. I've always felt that this is a little unfair. Yes, her accent was all over the place, but considering Jackie Lane must have been given so much conflicting direction, I can't really come down too hard on her for it. In fact, I can't really come down too hard on Dodo at all. I actually think she's a fine character, and Lane does a stand-up job considering all of the different directions she must have been pulled. No, I think the problem with Dodo is how the show treats itself at this point. We're halfway through the 3rd year, and she is the latest in a growing line of regular characters to be introduced. And by this point, the show has kind of developed a shorthand with the viewers, which goes along the lines of, we've lost one companion, here's another one. The problem is that it seems to treat Dodo herself as if she is also in on this shorthand. She seems to take everything in her stride all too readily. It's almost like she's aware that she's the new companion in the show Doctor Who, and that makes her less sketched than her forebears Susan and Vicky. It's a shame, because Lane as Dodo is really rather a charming presence here, and so obviously being a replacement for Susan and Vicky, combined with her almost blasé self-awareness as a character, does her no favours. They've learned from the show's mistakes with Susan though. Dodo, like Vicky, isn't a scaredy cat, and is also rather cheeky and mischievous. However, because of this, she doesn't feel as real a person as Vicky. This is despite some valiant efforts from Jackie Lane, who really does make the most of all of the handholds in the text. Matter-of-factly correcting Stephen when he accuses her of crying with
"Nobody knows he's running"
is, I have to say, rather wonderful. And her certainty that they've landed in Whipsnade, combined with the confidence with which she tells Stephen this, is a lovely reminder of Stephen's own scepticism when he found himself in a time machine in the Time Meddler. I do feel for Dodo though, and more importantly for Lane, just as I did for Susan and for Carol Ann Ford. This may only be her first story, but going on the evidence here, I can see that the show is in danger of mistreating her just as it did the Doctor's granddaughter. And this brings me to what I think is my final point on this story, that I consider its biggest talking point, Dodo Chaplet. While I do consider the guest performances stronger in the second 2 episodes than in the first, and I do quite like the Doctor's refusal to consider one side good and one side bad at the story's conclusion, pointing out as he does that the monoids weren't exactly treated very nicely. Besides the midpoint twist and its new companion, I find this story entirely unremarkable, almost disposable. 110 episodes of Doctor Who down now, and I think we've hit the first ever so slight disappointment in season 3. No matter though, I'm still loving every minute of this journey as a whole. Either the reveal of the finished statue or
"Nobody knows he's running"
apologies Eric, I really cringed.
Fascinating!
So John Wiles is out of the picture and the little mini era of Doctor Who is over. And given his fractious relationship with Hartnell, it'd be nice to think, wouldn't it, that Hartnell now has the opportunity for a new producer to come in to have a more fruitful relationship with whom he could see eye to eye, except we all know how that panned out. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this meal in the security kitchen, then you know how YouTube works. Please give it a like. It really does help the channel and the marathon enormously. And what do you think of the arc? Is it an audacious use of the 4-episode format, or a plodding example of slightly stilted sci-fi? And do you think that Dodo is unfairly maligned, or every bit as deserving of all the negativity thrown her way as a character? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for the first appearance of a villain in the upcoming 60th anniversary specials. Potentially. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll see you in the celestial toy room.